My name is Gianluca Galletto, and I am senior advisor at the Tomorrow.City. I was one of the founders of the first iteration of this. As my daytime job, I have a company that works connects local national governments with companies that provide solutions to them, and my previous experience is in Wall Street, and then with the mayor of New York. I was the head of commerce and trying to attract tech companies to New York and make the ecosystem grow, and then I work for the Housing Authority as a managing director for technology partnership. So I'm telling you this because I bring a perspective of both private and public sector, been from the inside and outside, and I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly of both. and the other thing is I just want to add is that I'm Italian originally, imported in the US. I work a lot globally, and I've seen like a lot of good things that happen outside, a lot of good things that happen here, and sometimes I hear it's really interesting because a lot of the American public sector leaders say, oh, but in Europe you do things way better. And on the other side, they all think, oh, but in America it's so much easier to do public-private partnerships, and then I see, I think the truth is in the middle. Great things happen here and there, just about the context and everything. So today we're talking about how we can really think of policy frameworks, regulatory frameworks, legal frameworks, something that is a little different from what you see most of the times, especially with the hype on technology. I believe there's a lot of hubris of a lot of solutions looking for a problem. The drones, and we're not talking about that today, but this is extremely important, I believe. Very passionate about it, and I have two great guests here. And how do we, basically, what can we do to improve the way we build housing, we do infrastructure, we deploy technology, all the things. And we have the two panelists here, have both private sector experience and public. So they're both attorneys, and Cathleen Ward that works in commercial real estate and much more complex things. I would like you to say a couple of things about yourself, but she's also an elected official representing District 1 at the West Palm Beach. And Jay Taylor is an attorney, and he works in complex transactions with private companies and everything that also helps them with navigate with the public sector. So I'd like to maybe ask you to introduce yourself, and we go into what we had a little session before to understand what we want to talk about, and one of the things you're more passionate, not passionate in the sense that you think you're like one of the critical things that you want to talk about and maybe provide some clear examples. You talked about procurement, for example, but
we went all over the place. Yeah,
we
did.
We don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, the roadmap was tricky on remembering what we wanted to discuss. But hi, again, I'm Cathleen. I am a District 1 City Commissioner for West Palm Beach, and I also practice in legal field and represent businesses and banks. And so Jay and I had a lot of overlap in conversation on what that is. And we did cover procurement, private public partnerships, and I think West Palm Beach is a great example of we have a lot of visionaries and different visions within the city, but sometimes the systems in place can kind of hurt that movement from vision to action, and how do we solve that problem? And so some of the concrete examples I love to look at is, I don't know if anybody's been over to the Nora District, just to the north of downtown, but that's a perfect example of a public-private partnership where we had a private organization come in and acquire a ton of land, but within that framework actually worked with city staff, made sure that our code and everything that we had lined up could kind of match their vision when it came to infrastructure, roadways, housing needs, building in affordable workforce housing within that, having that framework in place so that when they got started on their construction, that there wouldn't be any barriers when it came to city action, and working with our CRA district to make sure, okay, how do we focus on TIF financing and making sure that if you want this roadway to be beautiful and the infrastructure to be beautiful, how is the government going to chip in? And they've successfully completed every single milestone and actually beat those milestones. And I think anybody in development, especially working with government, that does not happen very often. Usually it's, I need an extension, or hey, we found something else and we need more money. That has not been the case here. And so I feel like that's a perfect example within this city that's growing so rapidly of this is how you set things up for success. If you want to see this quicker, you need to make sure that there is coordination with staff and across the board, and not every situation you're going to be lucky enough to have one person acquire all of that property simultaneously, but it sets up those frameworks to, okay, we're not going to be stagnant in procurement, and we're not going to wait and then ask them down the road for $5 million. It's no, hey, this is the economic impact, we're bringing in $1 billion worth, and over time, could you provide X, Y, and Z? And so that's just a great local example. And I know from an international or New York base, there have been other tools that bigger cities have utilized. That's just one successful one that I wanted to point out.
Thank you. So
My name is Jay Taylor, and I'm a partner at Stinson Law Firm, and I focus my practice on a lot of startups, a lot of tech companies, transactional work, financing. And so my perspective is a little different. I haven't worked as much in the public sector, but what I see and what we were discussing, I'm from New York, and we see a housing crisis in New York, and we were talking about some of the barriers to entry and some of the issues in the New York housing markets. One being availability, reasons for the unavailability of the market, how the market has developed. We were saying that there are single-family homes in a couple of the counties in New York, lots of single-family homes, and there are regulatory barriers and other barriers to construction and to increasing the housing stock. One of those barriers is also that we have lots of folks coming from different parts of the world that want to be New Yorkers, and the city has passed some initiatives to increase the stock by a minimum of 20,000 units. And in terms of increasing the stocks, we also talked about public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships are important. Basically, they're where the public entities merge or work with private companies, because the idea is that private companies have more efficiencies, they have the technology, whereas public entities, like government entities, they are able to, finance. They have big pockets. They're able to finance projects, and so normally they work together. But there are always issues when these two get together, when public and private try to work together. There are some successful examples like broadband projects all over the country where federal and state governments are able to work together with telecom companies to lay broadband cable. But there are other examples where it's just difficult to work with, some public entities. We were talking about, this concept that I am the government, I am a large entity, and, in terms of contract negotiation, like I have the power here. And that's just one of the reasons why they're difficult. Some of the projects are difficult because the interests of the participants are different as well. So the private partners are often monopolistic, particularly in the telecom industry. And so their goal is not necessarily the same goals as the community, right? As servicing the community. They're profit motivated, and that's one reason why there's some, pushback and some issues. So I will.
Do you think there's something that can be tweaked in terms of also the legal framework that allows for these public-private partnerships? I was mentioning before, when the Europeans tell me like, oh, it's much more difficult to do it here because it has to be all government funded, blah, blah, blah. But is there any specific thing that you could be an example, something that can make it a little easier for this to happen with creating less roadblocks? You talk about roadblocks that companies have, right? That you try to solve.
Right.
Is there anything that we can propose?
Yes. So, and this is somewhat nuanced, right? In terms of regulation, right? We can start with regulation. There are some valid arguments as to why regulation should be reduced in terms of sometimes zoning to increase housing, sometimes permitting to encourage the additional growth and additional creation of additional units. However, that should take place within limits, right? Because if you reduce and eliminate all regulations, just wholesale, then you'll have unintended consequences, unintended long-term consequences, like you have communities like Flint, Michigan, or communities where you have no regulation simply because you were trying to build more housing to accommodate more people of low income status, but you've now created health crises. So you have to find a nice mix. So as a transactional attorney, what I try to do in negotiations is find an optimal mix, right? To me, there's no deal that can't be made. If you have one large party, government, public entity saying that I have the power to do this, it's difficult to negotiate those nuanced details, right, when you are structuring these public-private partnerships. And so that's why a lot of them fail sometimes, because the government, is just exercising too much power or too much regulation or inflexibility. So I think that's one of the things that we can look at to reduce.
Or if the government's too
failure rate.
big. I mean, if the government's far away. As a
That
city
was-
person, I'm closest to the people that are doing that. Or even if you're trying to promote innovation, if you're a smaller company, trying to get at somebody in Tallahassee, I'm just using Florida because that's my base, is more challenging, right? And so you're not there. And so if you're as a state increasingly taking power away from municipalities, then I have no say. If you have some innovation project, or if you are, again, going back to the North District or any of the other smaller projects I have in this area, and I'm completely taken out of the conversation, then you have another barrier to access and to go up to the state level and say, okay, now talk to me, you person who up here, you have no idea my city.
Right.
And I know we were talking about even that challenge between single-family homes and building and what that looks like. We do want to promote, we do have a housing crisis, affordability crisis, and if you whittle that down, it really is just housing stock. We need more housing stock. You said 20,000. I don't know the metrics for the West Palm Beach of what we would need, but that is constantly a problem. And from a state perspective, it's cities, you're creating too much barrier, you're creating too much regulation, and all of these things, I'm just going to take away your power. But in doing that, you don't know the day-to-day of my city, you don't know the day of what people are thinking. And so it's almost like you're trying to prove yourself, no, I can make a deal and I can get something done and I can utilize the tools, the regulatory tools that I have without it being a no stop. It's just, it's a tug of war continuously when it comes to that power.
Yeah, well, remember we discussed this because it brings. I'm going to bring it in now because I think it's. We discussed before the interactions between the local and the national governments, right? And how the institutional framework that we have. You have federal, state, then you have counties, and then you're local, and sometimes the fragmentation. So it's good that you have local governments because they're closer to the citizens, but at the same time, you have some planning issues. When you have to build infrastructure that's wide. And so what's the right balance? If you want to build like a network of trains, let's say, public transportation that really goes way beyond your city. And then you mentioned before, it was very interesting, I forgot about this, but after the pandemic, you had a big inflow of people, right? And then another dilemma is how do you balance like the legitimate interest of people who are in a nice area, they don't want to destroy the character of their area. Like I was thinking, imagine like a historic center of Florence or here in Palm Beach, and you start building whole skyscrapers, right? That makes the city attractive. But at the same time, there's also the need of more housing. So I strongly believe, but I don't have the answer, that there should be some other ways of reorganizing the relationship between local and state and national. And I don't know if you have any idea on that,
Right.
because I believe there are a lot of conflicts. I mean,
Yeah, there are these conflicts that exist. We'll just supplement what you were saying. It's not in my neighborhood, so yes, we want to build, right? We all want housing for low-income folks. So there are certain buildings and construction that we would encourage, but sometimes we don't want them in our neighborhood. And is it for historical reasons, Or is it for, well, I just don't want that in my neighborhood? So more often than not, it seems that it's the latter. Another thing I'll add to what you said is just to play devil's advocate. If you look at the state has a different interest than the locality, right? This is one of the things, yes, the federal government, they have their interests, the state has their interests, and the localities have theirs. The state has to take care of all of the localities. So it's looking at all the local governments, right? It's looking at more the infrastructure, technological infrastructure, the roads, bridges, buildings of the entire state. Whereas the locality, they have their local interests, right? They're thinking about their populations. Their populations are different. Their makeup, their needs are different. Their agriculture, manufacturing, they're all different. And so we have to find some way to bridge the gap so that there's a better communication between the state and the city. So I was listening to some of the presentations yesterday, and to me, AI analytics and analytics seem to be one area to look at, because through analytics you can find your policy prescriptions and you can target the best ways to address some of these issues, unique issues in unique cities. So I think that's one of the things that we should look at as well.
And I would hope
What do
that states lean on that. I'd hope that they would say, okay, hey, let's look at technology and see if we can do that and see best practices elsewhere. And Florida did Live Local Act to promote more development, and you could take something close by and essentially match the height limit to try to increase density, increase development. And as a city, we were like, okay, that's great, but that's not always going to work in our city. So it was a race to make sure that we updated our codes and our procedures in place to mirror something like that with the same goal in mind of increasing density, increasing development, making sure that infrastructure matches, but the way that West Palm wants to do it, not necessarily the way that the state is mandating it. And so that again was where, and working with the state and saying, hey, here's what we've proposed, an alternative to yours, and the state going, okay, actually, we don't mind that. And so that's always a race too, and that's how you want to respond, is not, oh, the state's doing this. No, it was our job to say, okay, the state wants this, we want this too, but how do we make it so that everybody can play together well and they can match, but to the level where our residents are comfortable with it and it's predictability. And you can't just plop and have unpredictability within development.
Yeah, but would you give more authority to the state or the federal government? What I see here is that, especially the executive branch of the federal government is extremely powerful, more powerful, I think, that probably in France is only similar. But at the same time, it doesn't act really in a way that, and I'm not talking about just currently, like it's not about current president or before, just like a structural thing. In really trying to, as he did in the past, like make sure that certain large infrastructure projects, imagine the highways, okay? The highways were built in the 50s. The federal government did that. You couldn't do that with like each country and each county and state. It would be a patchwork of a mess. The subway in New York City, okay, it was built by different companies. And that's why if you look at it, it's fantastic, okay? It's great. The largest number of stations in the world, 24 hours, but it's not particularly great, if it would, because it's been like a patchwork, and then it was all subsumed by the cities. Okay, now I manage this. And so I see that, and then I'm just talking a little bit more. My European experience is this, that in the U.S. is much faster in creating great innovations with all the stack sector and stuff. But when I look at other things, the fragmentation has actually stifled innovation. I give an example. In the U.S. was a much later adopter of cell phones than Europe. And you know why? Because Europe decided to have GSM. They put it together. We all use one standard. And so it was here there were 3 standards. And they didn't communicate with each other. It was AT&T and Sprint, and I forgot the other one. That's the one thing. The trains is the same thing. Why do the trains are like, I mean, one of the reasons is also because it's a very car-centric country. So I believe that, and it's more of a challenge, like that you should create some different ways of creating new jurisdictions that are extremely difficult to do politically, but we should think about these things and bring it to the discussion. And the reason we don't do it is because, it's politically impossible, because no jurisdiction wants to cede power, right? Yeah. But can we do this? Because I see it like happen as conflicts all the time. And in the city of New York, you have the airports, right? The airports are managed by a dual state authority. And So that's the. I
Imagine
need
being
some
a-
hope. I need some hope.
Imagine being a resident and going, "Hey, I've got a pothole or I've got this issue," and then us going, "Okay, let's see if it's a city road, a county road, a state road." Like, and those are again practicalities, 100%. But you're right. I mean, you're not going to fix it. We want to talk about state rights versus federal rights, and yeah, we could be here for a very long time for sure. I think it's that cooperation, it's respect, right? It's actually having humility from the top, the bigger government saying, I don't have all of the answers. I need to partner with my local organizations, just like we need to be partnering with our private sector to say we don't have all the answers from technology, innovation, all of these different sectors. We don't have the answers, so let's find those people who do and bring them in and have the humility of saying, I want to partner with you and make sure that we can grow. No, that doesn't happen perfectly and often, but we're imperfect humans, but that is the goal, I think, in a lot of ways, and even people who aren't promoting it.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about what you said, and basically think about the reality of this. Our technological advancements are offset by the negative influence of our politics and our political cycles, which is really, I'm with you.
Well, I mean, not that
need
Europe
to
is politically
fix
is
that.
also another mess.
I understand
I mean,
that.
it's not.
But it's difficult to move forward when we're on a 2-year cycle or a 4-year cycle to really take advantage of that innovation, because we would really take off if we could. So if we can solve that problem to supplement our politics, I think our innovation would exponentially, move us forward.
So the last thing on this is that bringing this European example is working or working, I don't know. But they created the metropolitan cities in Europe. So some depends on the countries. But for example, Marseille is the second largest city in France, as a mayor, but also as the president. They elect the president of the metropolitan area, and because they have different powers, but because especially on the transportation and all the other major infrastructure, they have the say, because it involves not just the city but the larger. Barcelona is similar. In Italy, they did something different. They made the mayor of the major city become the mayor of the metro area, and also create conflicts. And these are something of the changes that were done. It requires some constitutional changes too. At least it was an attempt. Here it's basically something that it's not even discussed at all, not at the federal level, at the state level. So I don't know. Let's start a campaign or something.
Well, we have counties in our cities, and so I feel like I feel like some people who don't understand, okay, what's the county doing if there's all these municipalities? There's unincorporated, and frankly, you're seeing a trend of, hey, I want this as part of my city, and the county kind of coordinating all of that and making sure that, okay, on a bigger level, we're coordinating all of this. I mean, even looking COVID response, that was heavily dependent upon our county. Our health institute, we have a healthcare district within Palm Beach County, and health departments and other big items when it comes to government overseeing and making sure that you're providing services, whereas a municipality is kind of working on those nitty-gritty day-to-day quality of life issues that are addressing your resident concerns. So I feel like there's some similarity there.
There is it with the county, but the difference is that you're still like two different jurisdictions, elected officials, and sometimes, they may be, it works and it doesn't. It works when you have the higher authority that has basically a higher say. The last say is, so you have city, county, state, federal, but sometimes it's not. And I actually like the fact that sometimes it's just equal in a way. So that's the issue that is more, they try to solve there in a way that make them, the larger one having more power than the smaller one. So that's the thing that I see. And the more, I think, for me, is what I look is really more between state and municipalities rather. And the fact that the federal government, I don't know, it doesn't really come in a way that it could coordinate all this. I don't know. But I think if you don't have anything on this, I don't want to hammer on this thing.
I have an idea.
Okay.
Just spitballing here. Since we have teched our way out of everything else, now this brings it back to smart city tech, right? So we have smart cities driven by tech. Of course, we have to address cybersecurity and privacy concerns, which we haven't gotten into that part of the discussion yet. But what if you had technology that could feed and standardize all of the data points from each city, each municipality, each locality, and that fed into a state system, and that state system could prioritize various things based on the feeds. I mean, I think that could help. Just an idea. If we're going to do the technology and to try to equalize and give everyone the opportunity, because there are different demographics, there's different everything's, right? This city needs roads, this city needs bridges. So we can prioritize finances, and I think, we're gonna have to use technology to get ourselves out of our political mess.
But can I talk about procurement again? Because you really like, and I really, what do you think we can do to make it a little easier to, for example, to adopt technology? You talk about technology, right? And every place has different ways to create, let's say, pilots up to a certain amount of money. Then you can do a semi-sole source, or it's already a little bit like that, right? But procurement is something that I've been in this circuit for a long time, and it's actually one of the real, the sacred grail. Like, how do we solve this? And because if you want to be democratic, you gotta have it. You can. You have any ideas like working in more? It's not really my expertise, so I don't. But that we can make it a little more easier to adopt things that work.
Right.
Not that don't work, but that work. And sometimes it's you get companies sometimes get frustrated because they don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating for the public sectors too, because I've been in the place of writing an RFP. So.
And you want to make it. You think you've created something fantastic. People will respond to it, and then you get a couple responses. And we were talking about that before. Of like, how do you incentivize private sector to say, I'm going to try to work with government, because they don't want. It's just not something that people want to do, and they think like it's slow moving. I'm going to do all this stuff. I have to put the time and resources into even responding to it, thinking about how I can even fulfill this and move forward with it. And trust me, it's something I think about a lot of times, because honestly, I try to avoid procurement. I get the purpose of it. I get the transparency of it and the response that you want to provide to people. But the other aspect of that is it is slower. There are challenges. There's so many other things that can go wrong with those processes, versus, hey, let's try to create areas where we can try to pilot something. We can have that go quickly at a certain level, so that if it works and it works well, then we can move right into actually, implementing it. And how do we get to that point? I wanted to, up in my district, change an entire mixed-use district and incentivize higher development and get community feedback. I can't remember how long I worked with staff to say, I'm not doing procurement with this. I'm not doing that, because it's going to be another year down the road that we're even starting community engagement versus getting the person hired, getting the feedback, and moving forward with that development. And we found ways around it that I didn't hear from the community. Can't believe you hired this person to do the. No, it wasn't like that, because you still had community feedback. You had a lot of it, and you had crazy engagement from it. I mean, those meetings I had were the most well-attended meetings that I have had, because they wanted that. They just wanted action. They didn't want to hear something. How many meetings I've been in where it's like, oh gosh, you're asking me this again? You asked me this in 2010 and 2015, and you took the studies, you did this, and you put them on a wall because, administration's changed. You have to get it done quickly. And I get it. The transparency needs to happen as well, but I think there's exceptions to those hard rules, and we're trying to navigate that so that we can get stuff done faster, and I can get shovels in the ground and get vertical construction going, which I really don't think I would, with the mixed use district that I'm talking about right now. I think we'd still not have approved it, or at this point, and that was years ago, if I had gone the procurement route. So.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know if you want to add something. I don't know how much time we have. I've lost track of it.
Yeah, me too.
I could stay here forever because I like the conversation.
Right. And so, so speaking of that bureaucracy, what you have is, if you have the federal government exiting from that bureaucracy, not even voluntarily, right? You have private companies that say, you know what, dealing with the federal government is too difficult. So we're not going to enter into these private-public relationships. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to invest ourselves. And right now, where you have a concentration of wealth, there is capital out here looking to participate in projects and looking to participate in growth things. But if you don't have that government is elected for the people, by the people, to do things for the people, you now have private companies doing things for themselves. They can find this capital in this environment, and so guess whose needs do not get met? It's our needs do not get met. And guess what private sector invests in? Cryptocurrency, AI, the things that not necessarily making our lives better, but it's all a natural.
Sometimes the creating the famous sandbox sometimes helps, especially with doing new technology. I've seen like Phoenix uses it a lot, where you create a space, regulatory kind of a safe space in which you can try different things outside of the regulation and everything, but they only get scaled if they work. Or like another example I can give is in New York City, there's the Navy yards. Is like they used to build ships, aircraft carriers. It was donated from the Navy to the city. It was almost abandoned. Now it's a city within a city dedicated to innovation, like manufacturing, et cetera, and in that space, you can do it's almost private in a sense. It's run by a nonprofit, but you can test a lot of that's where they first tested the autonomous vehicles, right? So maybe these are also other ways, or like creating, let's say, up to $250,000. I think if you do innovative pilot, then you don't need to go through a procurement. You just do it like directly. I don't know. There's a bunch of things. So,
but when you talk about New York, and I know you guys, when I lived there, obviously Uber is just normal now. Lyft is normal now. Do you remember when Uber was banned in New York City?
Yes.
And the taxi union and all of that, and it was, hey, per person.
They tried to ban it.
Yeah, but it was when I lived there, it was banned.
But it was banned?
It was banned early on. Early on, it had started and they banned it because, again, the taxi drivers were like, well, wait a second, hold on, I have this license here that the city gave me, and what are you talking about? And that's a perfect example of you stifled innovation just then because you had a system in place where this was, hey, long-term in taxis, but they weren't updating their systems. They weren't doing what Uber was doing with technology, and then they backtracked and allowed it because they're like, you had the masses being like, wait a second, you've got this new technology, an easier, less barriers to entry because of how many of those licenses you could get, and it changed. And I think that's a perfect example of government don't
but it also
stifle
destroyed
this
a lot
innovation.
of people. Some people killed themselves because they couldn't pay their loans to buy the medallion. So.
That is true.
But wasn't that the problem with the medallion system, not necessarily the problem with Uber?
I agree, and I
Right.
said the same. Like this is like it. For example, in Italy, it's just a disaster. The taxi drivers are so powerful, and there's so very few that can block the entire city. And I totally agree with you. And I remember at some point it was amazing because Uber hired David Plouffe. Remember David Plouffe ran the Obama campaign. So you open Uber, and you see Uber X, Uber Black, luxury, and then there was another option, and it was de Blasio. I work for the mayor, but it basically you would just kill this mayor's initiative because it's a stifle innovation. So everybody would see on their app. There was a great campaign, I think, against
Okay,
that.
I thought de Blasio would come pick you up.
No, it's
So-
like he doesn't want you to use Uber.
So let me add to that innovation, because that is a very interesting point that you say what happened with Uber. Because if you look back over the last 30 or more years, every time we innovate, every time we do something, there's a slingshot effect. Number one, you have the folks from MIT and Yale's innovating and creating new technologies.
What is MIT?
So what happens is the government generally can't keep up, right? So government workers can't keep up. A lot of times they don't understand the technology. So there's this effect where they don't know what to do for maybe like the first year or so. They're like, and so they let it ride.
True.
This happened with cryptocurrency. This happened with derivatives. Like, you can go back 30 or 40 years and you can see everything, right? They let it go. A lot of people made a lot of money, .com, and then we slingshot in the other direction. They say, oh, wait a minute, there's too many people making too much money, or this is not good technology. And so they shut it and they go in the other direction. And, at least in terms of crypto, a lot of people got fines. Some folks got arrested for issuing white papers on crypto that had no utility, no value, yet they made millions. And then finally, the rules normalize. This happens with everything. So I think there's just a natural ebb and flow between innovation and government regulation, where government regulation often takes a year or two, and I'm just stating that number arbitrarily, to catch up to the innovation that
Optimistic.
yes, yeah, that we do in technology and otherwise.
I think we're way past our time, right? And
I'm glad we're able to keep you
I
here, though.
wanted to also include the audience. I'm sorry, but it became really interesting conversation, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Um,
And I think we will live with the fact that just we have to live with the ebb and flows,
We have to.
but we still have to fight to get it to make it
We
better.
have to.
Challenge
We
the ebb
cannot
and
give
flow.
up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
You
guys.
guys.
Thank you.